The only friend I ever had. Do you mind if we do another question that isn't about Wicked? Because I feel like I've spent the last 2 years talking about it, and I think that we have an opportunity to start talking about something else. Is that okay?
Something isn't adding up. For months, the public was sold a very specific image. 2 stars. One massive movie. Endless praise. Endless support. Every interview seemed perfectly coordinated. Every red carpet appearance looked like proof that everything behind the scenes was exactly as polished as it appeared on camera. But then people started noticing little things. Not one giant scandal. Not one explosive statement. Small details. The kind of details most people scroll right past. Different energy in interviews. Different interactions. Different moments that suddenly had fans asking the same question. Are we seeing the whole story? Or are we only seeing the version that Hollywood wants us to see? And here's where it gets interesting. Most coverage has focused on what these 2 stars said publicly. Almost nobody is talking about what happened around them, the pressure, the expectations, the politics of a billion-dollar franchise. Because sometimes the biggest story isn't the argument everyone is looking for. Sometimes it's the distance, the shift, the moment 2 people stop moving in the same direction. Now, to be clear, there is no confirmed evidence of a personal fallout between Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo. But that hasn't stopped fans from dissecting every appearance, every interview, and every public interaction looking for clues. And the deeper people look, the more questions they seem to find. Because if everything is perfectly fine, why are so many viewers convinced something changed? That's the question nobody can seem to answer. And once you start pulling on that thread, the entire story begins to look very different than the one we've been told. To understand why so many people suddenly started questioning the relationship between Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo, you have to go back to the beginning of the Wicked rollout. Because when these 2 were first announced as the faces of one of the most anticipated musical films in years, the reaction was massive. Not just because of the movie itself, because of what they represented. You had Ariana Grande, one of the biggest pop stars on the planet. Then you had Cynthia Erivo, an award-winning performer respected for her acting, stage work, and vocal ability. On paper, it looked like a perfect combination. Different backgrounds, different audiences. One giant project bringing everything together. And for a while, that's exactly how it looked. Every public appearance reinforced the same narrative. Mutual respect, professional admiration, supportive interviews, smiling photographs. The kind of promotional campaign studios dream about when they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on a major release. But here's what many people missed. The movie wasn't just carrying enormous financial expectations. It was carrying emotional expectations too. Wicked already had a passionate fan base before a single frame of the film was released. That meant every casting decision, every interview, and every public interaction would be examined more closely than normal. And that pressure started building immediately. Fans weren't just watching the movie's development, they were watching the people involved. Every quote became a headline. Every appearance became content. Every interaction became something viewers could pause, replay, and analyze. In today's entertainment world, celebrities aren't judged only by their work anymore. They're judged by how they appear to interact with everyone around them. That's important to remember. Because sometimes audiences begin creating stories before any actual story exists. As promotion for the film continued, both actresses appeared committed to presenting a united front. They spoke positively about each other's talent. They discussed the challenges of bringing beloved characters to life. And publicly, there was very little evidence suggesting any serious conflict. But then something interesting happened. The spotlight surrounding the project became increasingly uneven. Ariana Grande was already one of the most recognizable celebrities in the world before filming began. Every outfit generated headlines. Every social media post became news. Every public appearance attracted attention from entertainment outlets across the globe. Cynthia Erivo, despite being enormously respected within the industry, often received a different kind of coverage. And some fans started noticing that difference. Online discussions began questioning whether media attention surrounding the project was becoming too focused on one star over the other. Some viewers argued that this imbalance wasn't intentional. Others believed it reflected the reality of celebrity culture, where global pop stars naturally attract more coverage than almost anyone else. Neither side completely agreed, but the conversation had started. Listen, this is where things become complicated. A difference in media attention does not automatically mean there's tension between the people involved. Yet once fans start noticing patterns, they begin looking for explanations. And that's exactly what happened. Some viewers started revisiting interviews. Others started comparing body language. Others began analyzing comments, reactions, and interactions that previously seemed insignificant. Suddenly, ordinary moments were being viewed through a completely different lens. And once that process begins, it's very difficult to stop. The internet has a habit of turning small observations into larger narratives. A delayed response becomes a clue. A different tone becomes a clue. A missed appearance becomes a clue. Before long, people aren't looking at isolated moments anymore. They're building theories. At the same time, another factor was shaping public perception: the sheer size of the Wicked project. Major film productions create enormous pressure behind the scenes. Long filming schedules, extensive promotional obligations, constant media attention, endless expectations from studios and fans. Even under the best circumstances, that environment can be exhausting, which raises an important question. Were fans observing actual tension? Or were they observing the normal strain that comes with participating in one of the biggest entertainment projects of the decade? Nobody seemed completely sure. And that's why speculation continued growing. The more attention the film received, the more people searched for hidden meaning in every interaction. Some believed they saw evidence of distance. Others argued the public was projecting expectations onto two professionals simply doing their jobs. Both interpretations gained traction. Both sides found examples supporting their views, and neither side had definitive proof. What made the situation even more interesting was that the conversation gradually shifted away from the movie itself. Instead of discussing performances, music, or production details, people became fascinated by the possibility that there was another story unfolding beneath the surface. A story no one had officially confirmed. A story built largely from observations, assumptions, and fan interpretation. And as that narrative continued spreading online, the questions only became bigger. Because if there really was nothing unusual happening, why were so many people convinced something had changed? That's the mystery that kept pulling more people into the conversation. And soon, a series of moments would give those theories even more fuel. The moment those theories started gaining traction, people began looking at every public appearance differently. What once looked like normal promotional events suddenly became evidence boards for thousands of amateur investigators online. Every smile was analyzed. Every answer was dissected. Every interaction was slowed down, clipped, reposted, and debated. And that's when the story took on a life of its own. Because the internet doesn't just react to narratives, it creates them. One interview in particular would spark days of discussion. Not because anyone said something shocking. Not because there was a public argument. Quite the opposite. People became fascinated by what wasn't being said. Fans noticed moments where conversations appeared carefully controlled. Others pointed out how quickly certain topics were redirected. Now, to be clear, none of that proves conflict. Professional media training exists for a reason. Major stars often stay focused on promoting projects rather than discussing personal dynamics. But once viewers become convinced there's a hidden story, ordinary behavior starts looking suspicious. And that's exactly what happened. The more people searched, the more examples they believed they found. Some pointed to moments during press appearances. Others highlighted social media activity. A few even compared footage from different events, arguing that the energy between the two stars seemed different depending on the setting. Here's where things get interesting. Most of these observations were incredibly subjective. One person would watch an interview and see two performers supporting each other. Another person would watch the exact same interview and see awkwardness. Same footage, completely different conclusions. That tells you something important. A lot of this conversation wasn't really about evidence. It was about interpretation. And interpretation is where fan communities become powerful. Once a theory starts spreading, people naturally begin noticing details that support it. Details that don't fit the theory often receive less attention. It's not necessarily intentional. It's just how people process information. But then another factor entered the picture: the growing discussion around recognition and visibility. Some fans began arguing that Cynthia Erivo wasn't receiving the same level of public attention despite carrying an equally important role in the project. They pointed to headline coverage, social media engagement, and entertainment news cycles. In their view, the conversation surrounding the movie increasingly centered around Ariana Grande. Others disagreed completely. They argued that Ariana's level of attention had little to do with Wicked itself, and everything to do with her existing global celebrity status. Before the film was ever announced, she already had one of the largest fan bases in entertainment. Naturally, media organizations would focus heavily on her activities. Both arguments gained support, and both arguments fueled further speculation. Because once discussions about visibility started appearing, people began wondering whether that imbalance could create pressure behind the scenes. Not necessarily conflict, not necessarily resentment, just pressure. Listen, massive productions are complicated. Every actor arrives with different experiences, different expectations, and different relationships with the public. Add nonstop media coverage, millions of online opinions, and enormous commercial expectations, and suddenly even normal workplace dynamics can become subjects of public debate. That possibility caught people's attention. Some fans started asking whether the real story wasn't personal tension at all. Maybe the issue, if there even was one, involved public perception. Maybe the challenge wasn't the relationship between Ariana and Cynthia. Maybe it was the way audiences and media outlets treated them differently. And honestly, that theory started gaining momentum. Because unlike many online rumors, it didn't require secret feuds or hidden betrayals. It relied on something everyone could actually observe: the difference in how celebrity culture distributes attention. But now another unexpected twist appeared. The more the public discussed supposed tension, the more both women continued presenting a united front. Publicly, there were still positive comments. Publicly, there was still mutual respect. Publicly, there was very little concrete evidence supporting the dramatic theories circulating online. And that created a contradiction. If there was genuine conflict, why wasn't it becoming visible? If there wasn't genuine conflict, why were so many people convinced otherwise? Nobody seemed able to answer that question. The mystery itself became more important than any specific piece of evidence. Every new interview generated fresh reactions. Every appearance created new debates. Every headline seemed to add another layer to a story that remained frustratingly unclear. Meanwhile, entertainment media started noticing the conversation too. Articles began discussing fan theories. Social media accounts highlighted viral discussions. Reaction channels weighed in with their own interpretations. The story was no longer limited to dedicated fans. It was spreading. And the wider it spread, the harder it became to separate observation from assumption. That's when some of the most surprising theories started appearing. Not because there was proof, because people hate unanswered questions. When information feels incomplete, audiences often create explanations to fill the gaps. Sometimes those explanations are accurate. Sometimes they're completely wrong. But they spread quickly because they offer something people desperately want: certainty. And as more theories flooded social media, one thing became clear. The conversation was no longer just about Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo. It had become a larger debate about fame, attention, perception, and the stories people create when they believe they're seeing something hidden beneath the surface. And soon, another development would push those discussions even further than anyone expected. By this point, the conversation had moved far beyond a simple fan theory. Not because new evidence had appeared. Not because either woman publicly addressed the rumors. The story kept growing because people were starting to ask a different question altogether. What if the real tension wasn't between Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo? What if the pressure was coming from everything surrounding them? Think about it. For years, Hollywood has struggled with balancing massive celebrity power inside ensemble projects. When one performer enters a production with a global fan base that reaches hundreds of millions of people, the spotlight naturally follows them. It doesn't matter what the studio intends. It doesn't matter what the cast intends. Attention has a way of choosing its own direction, and that creates challenges. Not necessarily personal challenges, professional ones. Because once public attention becomes uneven, Every interview starts carrying different expectations. Every headline starts telling a slightly different story. Before long, audiences aren't watching a project anymore. They're watching individual narratives unfold inside that project. Some people believe that's exactly what happened here. Again, there is no confirmed evidence of a personal fallout between Ariana and Cynthia. But according to discussions across social media, many viewers became convinced that something shifted as promotional efforts intensified. The question was always the same: what changed? And that's where the theories started getting more sophisticated. Early speculation focused on body language in interviews. Later discussions focused on something much bigger: public perception. Some fans argued that the media unintentionally created an imbalance by framing the story primarily around Ariana's celebrity status. Others pushed back immediately. They pointed out that Ariana's enormous visibility wasn't something she personally created for this project. She arrived with one of the largest audiences in entertainment. Media outlets follow attention because attention generates clicks. That's how the business works. But now it gets interesting. Both sides could be partially right. A person can receive more coverage without asking for it. And that same coverage can still affect public perception. That's what made this conversation so difficult to untangle. Nobody needed a villain for the situation to become complicated. Sometimes complicated situations happen naturally when different levels of fame collide inside the same project. Listen, Hollywood history is full of examples like this. One actor becomes the face of a movie. Another actor receives critical praise. A third actor earns industry respect. All three can contribute equally while being perceived completely differently by the public. The audience often sees competition where none exists. And that possibility started gaining traction among people following the Wicked rollout. Some observers began suggesting that fans themselves might be responsible for escalating the narrative. Every time one actress received praise, comparisons immediately followed. Every time one actress trended online, discussions shifted toward whether the other deserved more attention. That pattern repeated constantly. Without realizing it, people may have been creating the very divide they were accusing others of creating. And that's a fascinating possibility, because if true, it would mean the biggest source of tension wasn't behind the scenes. It was happening directly in front of everyone, online, in public, across millions of conversations taking place every day. The deeper people looked into that idea, the more convincing it became. Not because it proved anything, because it explained why so many conflicting interpretations existed at the same time. One group saw friendship. Another group saw distance. Another group saw professional collaboration. Another group saw hidden resentment. The reality is that all of those conclusions came from the same limited pool of public information. That's why certainty remained impossible. Then another unexpected development changed the discussion. Instead of focusing entirely on interactions between the two stars, some entertainment commentators began examining the larger promotional machine behind blockbuster films. They argued that major studios carefully manage messaging, appearances, and publicity campaigns. Not because they're hiding scandals, because consistency matters. That observation led to another question. If audiences are seeing a highly controlled promotional environment, how much can they realistically learn about personal relationships from public appearances alone? The answer may be less than people think. A red carpet lasts minutes. An interview gets edited. A social media post shows only what someone chooses to share. Yet audiences often use those fragments to construct complete narratives. And that's exactly what appeared to be happening. By now, the original question had evolved into something much larger. People were no longer searching for proof of a fallout. They were trying to understand why the idea of a fallout felt believable to so many viewers in the first place. That's a completely different mystery. Because sometimes the most revealing story isn't whether a rumor is true, it's why people were ready to believe it. And the more attention that question received, the more complicated everything became. The theories kept growing, the debates kept spreading, the uncertainty remained. But what nobody expected was that a completely different angle was about to emerge. An angle that had less to do with friendship, less to do with rivalry, and more to do with something Hollywood has been dealing with for decades. The politics of perception. And once that conversation started, the entire narrative surrounding Ariana Grande, Cynthia Erivo, and Wicked began taking another unexpected turn. The deeper this story went, the less it seemed to be about a single friendship, and the more it started revealing something bigger about modern celebrity culture. Because after months of speculation, endless fan theories, and countless social media debates, one fact remained unchanged. Nobody had produced clear evidence of a personal fallout, and yet millions of people continued talking as if one had already happened. That alone is worth paying attention to, because it raises a question that most coverage never addresses. Why are audiences so quick to believe that successful women working together must secretly be in conflict? Think about how often this pattern appears. Two actresses share a major project. People immediately start comparing them. One receives more headlines. The other receives more critical praise. Instead of celebrating both, the conversation shifts toward competition, toward rivalry, toward imagined tension. And some observers believe that's exactly what happened here. Not because fans were being malicious, because comparison has become part of entertainment culture itself. Every award show creates comparisons. Every box office report creates comparisons. Every interview creates comparisons. Before long, audiences stop viewing people as collaborators and start viewing them as opponents. That perspective changes everything. Suddenly, normal differences in personality begin looking suspicious. A reserved response becomes evidence. A different communication style becomes evidence. A separate appearance becomes evidence. The story starts writing itself even when the people involved never wrote it. And that's where this situation becomes especially interesting. Because according to public interviews, both Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo repeatedly expressed admiration for one another throughout the promotional cycle. They discussed the challenges of making the film. They praised each other's performances. They spoke about the emotional experience of bringing these characters to life. Yet somehow, those statements struggled to compete with speculation. Why? Because certainty is less exciting than mystery. A confirmed friendship ends a conversation. A rumored fallout creates endless content. And in today's media environment, endless content tends to win attention. Listen, that's not necessarily anybody's fault. Algorithms reward engagement. Questions generate engagement. Theories generate engagement. Debates generate engagement. A simple explanation rarely spreads as fast as a complicated one. That's why the narrative continued growing long after many people expected it to fade away. But now comes the most surprising twist of all. What if the story people were chasing never existed in the way they imagined? What if the real story was never about betrayal? What if it was about perception? Because when you step back and look at everything from a distance, a different picture begins to emerge. You see a massive movie. You see enormous public expectations. You see two accomplished performers under constant scrutiny. You see millions of fans analyzing every available detail. And you see social media transforming observations into narratives at record speed. That's a very different story from the one most people started with. And honestly, it might be the more revealing one. The reason this conversation became so popular may have less to do with Ariana Grande or Cynthia Erivo, and more to do with what audiences expect from celebrity relationships in general. People want hidden drama. People want unexpected conflict. People want secrets waiting to be uncovered. Sometimes those stories exist. Sometimes they don't. The challenge is knowing the difference. And that's where this entire situation remains unresolved. Because despite all the theories, despite all the analysis, despite all the viral discussions, there are still questions that nobody outside those involved can answer with certainty. What were the real dynamics behind the scenes? How did each person experience the pressure surrounding the project? Did public narratives affect their professional relationship in ways fans never considered? Or was the entire controversy largely created by outside perception? Those questions remain open. And until they are answered directly, speculation will probably continue. Some viewers will remain convinced they noticed something unusual. Others will continue believing the internet exaggerated ordinary circumstances into a dramatic storyline. Both perspectives will likely survive for a long time. Because the truth is that perception has always been one of Hollywood's most powerful forces. It can create stars. It can create narratives. And sometimes it can create mysteries that become bigger than the facts themselves. That's where this story stands today. Not with a confirmed betrayal, not with a proven fallout, but with a fascinating question about fame, attention, and the stories people tell themselves when the full picture remains just out of reach. And maybe that's the reason people can't stop talking about it. Because the most powerful mysteries aren't always the ones with answers. Sometimes they're the ones that leave just enough uncertainty for everyone to see something different. And in this case, that uncertainty may be the biggest story of all. So now the question goes to you. After everything we've covered, do you think fans genuinely spotted signs that something changed between Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo? Or do you think social media took a few ordinary moments and turned them into a story much bigger than reality? Because that's what makes this situation so fascinating. The facts that are publicly available tell one story. The internet tells another. And somewhere between those two versions is the truth that everyone is still trying to figure out. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We go beyond the headlines, beyond the viral clips, and beyond the narratives that everyone else is repeating to look at what's really driving these conversations. And trust me, there are still plenty of questions surrounding this story that people aren't talking about. As new interviews surface, new appearances happen, and new discussions emerge, we'll be here breaking it all down piece by piece. Now I want to hear your opinion. Do you believe there was ever actual tension between Ariana and Cynthia? Or do you think the real story was the pressure of fame, fan expectations, and social media creating a narrative that took on a life of its own? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Because sometimes the biggest Hollywood stories aren't about what happened behind closed doors. They're about why millions of people became convinced something happened in the first place.